morning, everyone.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. Do you want to go ahead and get started? We have with us Dr. Marcus Fila today. He's the Associate Professor of Management, Leadership, Minor Director, Researcher, Speaker, Consultant on Work Stress and Reducing Unwanted Turnover. We're excited to have him, and I think that you're really going to enjoy this today. So I'm going to turn it over to him. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just do a screen share again. Bring that up. All right. Can everyone see this? All right. Let me just go to, here we go. There. Well, welcome. It's genuinely lovely to be here and a real pleasure. And thank you for that warm introduction. And yeah, I do hope you enjoy the talk. It's obviously not a wonderfully positive subject on the front end, but we can turn it and make it positive with what we're going to talk about, because I really want to get into some things we can do about this that often get overlooked. And you don't see them written a lot in the business press. A lot of what is written about this subject comes from not bad angles, but just from one direction. And when you're involved with the research, as I am, and lots of other people are, you see it from a different angle. So I want to sort of bring some of that to bear today. I think just to get us all on the same page, we're all here for a reason, aren't we? You know, it might be ourselves, it might be people that work for us in a nonprofit. And it's a really interesting subject in the sense that everyone, bar none, that I talk to about it and say that I've really spent a large part of my life, you know, involved in this, have all said the same thing. They've said, oh, that's really interesting and that's super relevant to me. And can I be one of your participants next time you do a research study and things like that? But something I'm going to get into today is actually how much this subject gets ignored, particularly in companies, and why it gets ignored. And I'll say up front before we start, really, I want plenty time for questions with the hour and a half that we have today. I don't just want to prattle on to you uninterrupted for an hour or something. I mean, seriously, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I'm happy to stop and answer them, and then we should still have Q&A time at the end as well. We should have plenty of that, hopefully. So good interaction all around. I may or may not get you involved in a short exercise later on in the breakout rooms if we have those on here, or at least try to do something in that direction. So please just jump in at any time, put it in the chat. You can also interrupt me if you want to with a question. That's perfectly fine. So just so you're comfortable. I don't want to sort of bore you too much with my own background, because I want to sort of help you and talk about the subject, but just to give you a little context. Okay, so why is this guy into this subject? How did this happen? As you can tell by the accent, I grew up in Texas. No, I'm from the UK, and I've been over here in the States 20 years now. And it was really interesting because before I was a professor and a consultant, I was in industry for about 10 years. And I was dealing with quite senior leaders very early on. And the stress subject came up in a couple of different roles I had. First of all, when I was very young, I was in the middle of London doing a sort of media sales position where we would be cold calling CEOs all over the world and talking to them about how they built their companies and trying to get them sort of involved with a broadcasting thing we were doing. And the stories were full of joy, but also the stress points, the tension points, and them sometimes even being the experts in the room, not knowing exactly what to do about it. And then so that piqued my interest. I did an MBA in London 20 years ago. I feel old saying that now. And we had, as any good MBA would have, classes in economics, finance, entrepreneurship, operations, HR, yada, 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 strategy. But there was one that really struck me that was taught by an occupational psychologist. It was personal and professional development. And that was when I was first exposed to things like work-life balance, okay, terms like this. And something just went off in my head because I started thinking to myself, gosh, if we get everything else right here, whether it's a for-profit, a non-profit, whether it's a company of 4 people or 40,000 people, if we get the other stuff right, but we don't get this stuff right, we're really going to fall off the rails. Okay, so it's, you know, probably fans of every subject will tell you why that's the most important one. But I came out of my MBA thinking this is actually the most important thing I learned. And then I got into quite high-end executive recruitment, which is the main thrust of how I got into this area. I was dealing with partners and directors for those big four accountancy practices like Deloitte and Ernst & Young and KPMG. And you're probably thinking, okay, well, how's that relevant to me running or being in a nonprofit? Well, it was really interesting because we were not dealing with people who were looking for jobs. We were dealing with people who were very high up, very successful, and we were trying to move them. And we never moved people for more money, because that was a bad reason for someone to move. Because if we just were going to get them a higher paycheck somewhere else, a year later, they'd do the same thing with another firm, and then we'd look stupid. So it was never that could be the primary motivator. And then in that industry, whether or not you're familiar at all with accountancy, all those practices do the same thing. So if you move from one to another, you're not going to a different job. You're doing the same job. I mean, literally, you could pick your desk up and go over there and just start to win clients again. So I was thinking to myself, why would people move? If we're not moving them for more money and they're going to be doing the same job, why on earth would they move from one to the other? And it just blew up. It was sort of like everything was about stress, desiring to leave because of missed opportunity, because of being overlooked. A big one that we'll talk about later was a lack of autonomy that they felt that they had earned being that senior, a lack of support, doing things outside of what they thought they should be doing. And these reasons were really, I don't want to say the weapon, that's a bad word, but they were really the sort of catalyst of them going from one organization to the other. So it just pinged me, because I always say I used to get paid to make turnover happen. I used to actually get paid to get people to move from one company to another. But then I started thinking more about the mess that was left behind when someone leaves, when someone really prominent leaves, or just anyone. And then I eventually had a career switch and got into industrial psychology, which is what I do now, really, as a management professor. And I thought, right, my subject is going to be stress at work and turnover. And I just was diving in and reading for ages. So that's how I got into it. And now I'm in a position where primarily, again, I'm a professor at Hope. Every now and then I publish some research on this. I'm always working on some projects in this area, speak at conferences. And then I also do this consulting/speaking piece, because I really want to take what we're doing out to people like you to help. So I hope that's not too long of or drawn out of a background, but that's sort of what's going on. Again, if you have any questions, just throw in any time. So what actually is it? Well, stress, and we're going to talk about why it gets ignored later, because for some reason people think it's hard to pin down. But we don't say the same thing about fear. We don't say the same thing about a lack of trust. Those are emotions too. But this is an emotion that has reactions to it. It's not an isolated thing. So it's basically, if you have unpleasant experiences, if you feel there's an imbalance between what's expected of you at work as a leader or as an employee, and you just feel you can't cope up with everything, okay? And some of the words I'm using in there are going to get to why some people sort of try to pretend this doesn't exist, etc. But we all feel it. And it's not only that we feel it, but it has implications. This picture looks like it was drawn by an 8-year-old. This is a diagram from one of the work psychology books that I've been using, but I couldn't get copyright for it, so I just redid it about when I sort of, it must have been very late at night or something when I did it, given the nice fat arrows or something. But essentially, there is a personal element into this. Okay, now this is why I think it gets overlooked, because people go, well, you're an individual and you're different to someone else. So what's stressful for you might not be for her or him. So haha, right? But you have something that could be a work demand or an issue at work, or something that you're facing or dealing with, maybe a difficult client or someone that you're working with, if you're in, say, social services or something. And it's a potential stress point. And then the question is, do you start feeling what I was just talking about? Do you start feeling this imbalance between what you can cope with and what you have to help you cope? Can you manage the stressor, okay? And then what happens is, if you feel you can't, or if there's just too much, you start to have these reactions. And I'm sure everyone in this room has had at least the short-term ones, right? Headaches, muscle pain, I don't have it today, thank goodness, but I have mild intermittent tinnitus. Isn't that fun? I don't know if anyone else has tinnitus. And when I get stressed, little buzz in the brain. Okay, that's lovely. And then we just sort of go into psychological things. I mean, you know, people throw out the word depression very easily, but that's a clinical one. But we might just feel a bit depressed. We might feel emotionally exhausted, burned out. And then we have behavioral reactions. You know, we might reach for food, we might stop eating, we might drink too much coffee, we might hit the bottle at lunchtime, we might smoke or smoke more or whatever it happens to be. Okay. And then some of those can be good too, like if you go for a workout to bust the stress, right? But then you get longer term stuff that happens if it's unchecked. And this can be really where people get deeply emotionally exhausted, where they can have, you know, symptoms of heart disease or other things start to form because of this. So it's an ongoing thing. And how you are as a person, where you're working, and sort of the situational characteristics around it are playing a part in these relationships. Okay, so that's essentially how it works. But the thing I would like you to think of is the stress is a process. The trigger might be immediate, but it's a process that we're going through. Okay. But I also want you to think of it as it's not all bad, because it's usually at this point someone will correctly say, well, we need some stress to perform. Yeah, absolutely we do. And I say to my students all the time, if you didn't have any stress at all about that upcoming exam, would you even try to prepare for it? And we need that adrenaline, we need that rush. I mean, you know, I to be transparent, every time I give a talk, I feel nervous, right? So it's, you know, it's just a sort of thing that you need. But the problem is not the front end of this. The problem is when it becomes too much. And something like 8 out of 10 nonprofit leaders in a survey they did have said that they're in the orange. I mean, a few are in the red zone, but a lot of people are in this orange zone. A lot of people are in this orange zone. I'm sure there's some heads nodding here. So it's curvilinear, which means that, you know, none is bad, too much is bad, but somewhere in the middle you have a sweet spot or a set of good spots here. Okay. So when we're looking at demands at work, or it's not only that some stress is good and some is bad, it's that some types are good and some are bad. So if you think about the things that you're expected to do in your role as a nonprofit leader or as an employee in a nonprofit, okay, some of those demands will be what we would call challenges, right? Things that are what you should be doing, things that will progress you, things that will make you a stronger and better, more talented person at what you're doing if you persist with them to a degree. Now, those can be overdone too. Okay, those can become bad if they're overloading you, but to a point, this is what you feel you should be doing. And then hindrances are things that are just obstacles, blockages to that. You know, so sort of typical ones is too much red tape, too much bureaucracy. Something we Brits are great at in the UK, by the way, which is reason number 483 to move over here. So just this, I mean, you know, if you think through your roles right now and you think, okay, what is something that I have to do that's challenging, but I ultimately know that you know, this is what I'm here to do, right? It doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's okay all the time, but this is really what, and then there's these other things in this other bucket that they're just blockages. And sometimes they're unavoidable. We can't eliminate them, but just the principle of not bogging people down too much. And this is going to be a big thing a little bit later on, okay? So before we get into kind of like why it gets ignored and what to do with it, just very quickly on this, I just wanted to show you sort of some general places of where it comes from, because it's multifaceted. There's lots of buckets here. It's not just one thing. Obviously, there are individual differences. You know, some people are just type A, some people worry more than others. Some people interpret things different than others, okay? Then we have, and this is a big one, but this is more about fixing a recruitment problem than fixing anything else in a nonprofit or in another organization. If there's a misfit with who you are and what you're doing. And I've not worked in or run a nonprofit. Well, I suppose Hope College is a nonprofit, but I mean, I've not run a nonprofit, so I'm not going to sort of sit here and pretend I know more how to do it than any of you do. But since I've been doing quite a few of these talks in nonprofit foundations, I've really started to get into how the thinking in nonprofit work can be different and actually counter to what people might think makes these things more dangerous. Right? I think there can be a thought sometimes in the nonprofit world that we should be immune from some of this. It's different to if you're in for-profit business, but I think some of these things can actually be worse. For example, if you have a heart for the mission of whatever it is you're doing, and you meet someone who is thinking about working for you or with you, they might have a terrible fit to what they're actually doing or what they would be doing for you. But if they have the heart to do it, there might be a softer road in, if that makes sense. You know what, let's just hire them because they're really into what we're doing here. But if the practical fit between what they would be doing for you and who they are and what they can do and cannot do is bad, that's just going to come up and cause problems later. Again, I've talked about if challenges become too much. And this concept here we're going to come up with near the end, and I'll unpack this for you in more detail later. But basically illegitimacy, which is, hey, are the things that people are doing for you or the things you're doing, are they what you should be doing in that role? This is one of the newest areas in the research. It sounds, okay, that doesn't sound very revolutionary, but it's massively overlooked, where a lot of stress, a lot of problems, turnover in tension comes from people going, you know, I've held 3 other jobs with the same job title as this one. This one's having me do different things. I didn't think I'd be asked to do this stuff. Even though it's not hard necessarily, it's taking me away from what I should be doing. Problems there. 3 things. The first one is the most obvious one. Role overload. Simply too much work. But I always want to give a little flag of warning on this one, because most people will say, in fact, in a national survey about 7 years ago, almost half of Americans said that they're overworked. And it's probably the same where I'm from too. And maybe they are, some of them, but there's a lot of context into it, which is if you feel that feeling of I'm just overloaded, overburdened here, some of that could be objectively that you're doing too much work. Some of it could be the situation around the work you're doing, right? Are you being recognized? Are you being encouraged? Are you being given the wrong things to do? Quantitatively, you might be doing too much work, but you might actually not be. And I say to my students, I say, look, if you're in a career that you don't like, right? So I fell out of love with being in recruitment eventually, and it just felt like a drag. And if you're in a job or a career you don't like, working 7 or 8 hours a day will feel a lot harder than doing 11 or 12 in a role that you're really thriving in. So objective workload can be something. But the other 2 are really interesting as well. Role conflict is simply different demands. Are there 2 or more people that you are taking demands from who have different views on what's expected? So, you know, if you're running a nonprofit, could it be the board expects certain things, but the people you're serving expect different things? If you're an employee in a nonprofit, could it be that your boss or a colleague have different expectations for what you should be doing, right? So it can cause issues. So when there's dual expectations that don't match and you have to try and keep everyone happy. Role ambiguity. This is another big one that gets massively overlooked in this area. When people are not entirely sure what's expected of them. I challenge HR leaders on this quite a lot, actually. When I give talks, I say to people, where do your job descriptions come from? Like, where are they coming from? Seriously, are they coming from a job board where you went on there, say Monster or something like that, and you need someone who does this role? So rather than writing a job description, you go find another company that's posted a very similar looking thing, and then you just download it, put your badge on there, upload it there again, and call it your, right? And the reason why this is important is because often job descriptions are quite ambiguous. They have that last bullet point. Can anyone tell me what the last bullet point says on most job descriptions? Can anyone unmute and tell me what it usually says?
Any other duties as expected.
Yeah, which means darn near anything that they want to throw at you, right? And this is really interesting because I think what they're trying to do, or what I know they're trying to do in most cases, is they're trying to leave some room here for, well, actually, you know, if there are these other things. But the problem is that those things start creeping in. And I think most people are quite aware of the 3 or 4 main things that they're there to do. But the stuff around the edges is fluffy, because especially if you don't know if you're being judged on it. So I'll give you a quick example from my primary role as a professor at Hope College, okay? The 3 main things any academic is there to do, and the amount of each one varies based on the institution. Teaching, or trying to, research, and service to the institution, right? Committees, all that stuff, right? So when a student says to me, oh, hey, can I come to your office and talk to you about some jobs I'm looking at, or just my career goals or something like that, we're always going to say yes, because with